Good evening everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So today is 6th June 2025 and today we have some very important topics for the discussion. So one by one we'll try to discuss all these important topics in a very detailed manner. And a PDF of this discussion is available in the description section. And you can easily access PDF of this particular discussion. And without any further delay, let's get into the discussion and let's understand all these important topics in a very detailed manner. And the first topic that we are going to discuss is about the Forest Rights Act of 2006. About this, an article has been published in the Hindu newspaper, and this is important for your Gender Studies paper too. And in fact, we'll try to understand what is the issue at first. And in fact, recently a published, and in fact, so this report has been published by in fact this report is called as India State of Forest Report, right? So this India State of Forest Report 2023, it has attributed that there are certain negative changes in the forest that have been taking place, and in fact the negative changes are also taking place in the tree cover as well. However, this Indian State of Forest Report 2023 has attributed these negative changes in both the tree cover and the forest partially because of implementation of the Forest Rights Act. And in fact, it rightly says that the implementation of the Forest Rights Act is actually responsible for the negative changes that have been taking place in the forest and tree cover. However, this has actually sparked a strong rebuttal from the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. However, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs has been strongly saying that this is not true. This was the response of the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, and in fact, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs even questioned the scientific validity of this claim by the Indian State of Forest Report of 2023. And in fact, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs even expressed the concerns about the implications for the implementation of the Forest Rights Act. So I hope you have understood the context of this particular topic. Now we'll be understanding what are the important findings of the Indian State of Forest Report 2023. So this Indian State of Forest Report is 18th biennial assessment of India's forests. And in fact, the Indian State of Forest Report is published by the Forest Survey of India every 2 years. And in fact, the Indian State of Forest Report 2023 also reveals that the major drop in country's dense natural forests. So therefore, it clearly mentioned that the implementation of the Forest Rights Act of 2006 is also responsible for the negative changes that have been taking place in country's natural forests. However, so within the recorded forest area in the country, in fact, there are around 1,200 square kilometers of forests have been lost. And this is equal area of the open forest as well. However, it has added over 2,400 square kilometers of very dense forests. However, outside the recorded forest area, so we have just discussed about the decline in the dense forest area in the recorded forest area. But what about the outside the recorded forest area? So India has lost around 64 square kilometers of dense forest and over 416 square kilometers of mid-dense forest area. However, the report has clearly attributes that the negative changes in the forest coverage in both the recorded forest area and non-recorded forest areas to certain factors. So what are those factors which are mainly responsible for the negative changes which are taking place in the forest coverage in India? So the first factor is human encroachments. Now in recent times, human encroachments have been significantly increasing, whether it is expansion of agricultural land into the non-agricultural or forest areas, So increasing habitation of human beings. Now all these factors are responsible for decline in the forest cover, and one such factor is human encroachments into the forest areas. The second factor is natural calamities that have been taking place because of the climate change. So the natural calamities including storms, floods and even landslides as well. And apart from that, the report has also claimed that harvesting of short rotation plantations or other forms of logging, and they are also responsible for the declining in the dense forest area. And even it also mentioned that titles given to the beneficiaries under the Forest Right Act, so this is also again responsible for the decline of dense forest cover in India. Right, so these are the major factors which are being attributed to the decline in the forest cover in India. Right, so I hope it is clear for you. So this is a biennial assessment by the Forest Survey of India, and this report released once in a 2 years, and this report clearly reveals that there is a major drop or decline in the forest cover in India. And in fact, so it has also provided some data about the decline in the forest cover in the recorded forest area as well as the non-recorded forest area. And in fact, this report has also clearly attributed the negative changes in the forest cover is because of encroachment, natural calamities, harvesting and even titles given to the beneficiaries under the Forest Rights Act of 2006. Now we'll be understanding about this Forest Rights Act of 2006 and how this act is actually responsible for the decline of dense forest coverage in India. Now in fact, this Forest Rights Act is also called as the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act of 2006. Now, what is the objective of this particular act? So this act acknowledges and grants forest dwelling scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers who have been lived in these forests for generations and the right to occupy and use the forest area and the forest resources. And this is the main objective of the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of the Forest Rights Act. Right, I hope you have understood the objective of this particular legislation, and there are a number of scheduled tribes who have been living in this forest area since generations. So therefore it is important and essential to recognize and identify their rights and provide them the traditional rights to live in those forests. So that is the main objective. However, this is specifically to undo historical injustice that they have suffered throughout the generations in India. Right, so this historical injustice that has occurred among the forest dwelling communities and also ensuring their right livelihood as well. Now if you talk about the eligibility, now the rights, the forest rights can be claimed by any member or a community that has at least for 3 generations. I mean, that is around 75 years who are living in those forest areas before 13th day of December 2005. Right, so this is the eligibility criteria for anybody to be recognized as a forest dwellers, traditional forest dwellers. And the other important thing is that the critical wildlife habitats have also been identified as part of this Forest Rights Act of 2006. And in fact, it provides that the critical wildlife habitats of national parks, sanctuaries, so they must remain inviolate for the wildlife conservation. Now, we all know that there are a number of legislative measures that have been taken by the government: the Wildlife Protection Act, the Environment Protection Act, Forest Conservation Act. So the main objective of all these different legislative measures is to ensure that the wildlife population is protected, the biodiversity is protected. Right, so there will be a minimal damage to the environment and ecology. So now the Forest Rights Act has also identified the critical wildlife habitats as well. Right, so what are the authorities which are vested with the forest rights? So there are three authorities which are vesting the forest rights to the traditional forest dwellers in different forest areas. Now firstly, Gram Sabha. So this Gram Sabha at the grassroots level, so this actually initiates the process of determining the nature and the extent of individuals or community forest rights firstly. Now secondly, at the subdivisional level, so a committee will be constituted. So this committee will be constituted by the state government and it examines the resolutions passed by the Gram Sabha. And at the district level, so there will be another committee, and this committee will also be constituted by the state government and it gives the final approval of the forest rights. And ultimately these are the three authorities and they can vest the forest rights for the forest dwellers, traditional forest dwellers, right? So I hope you have understood about the scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers and recognition of the forest rights line in India has been have been declined in the in this, and therefore this has to be incentive scheme. So this employment linked incentive scheme is in use in recent times. Why? Because the Union Cabinet has recently approved the employment linked incentive scheme, and because of this reason it is in news. So therefore now we need to understand what exactly is an employment linked incentive scheme. Now, what are the incentives provided to the employees and employers, and why the government is coming up with the employment linked incentive scheme? So all these factors will be understanding in a very detailed manner. Now in the context is that recently Union Cabinet has approved an employment linked incentive scheme, and in fact the Union Cabinet has also you know talked about the budget that has been allocated for the employment linked incentive scheme. And in fact, at first a union budget of 24-25 provided an allocation of 99,446 crore rupees for the employment linked incentive scheme. And in fact, the employment linked incentive scheme has been launched in India aimed at job creation, especially in the manufacturing sector. So here we need to understand the structure of Indian economy. So if you carefully look at the Indian economy's structure, still agriculture holds the dominant position in terms of total employment creation. So even though the majority of Indian workforce still engaged in the agriculture sector, so the GDP coming from the agriculture sector less than 20%. So more GDP is from the service sector, but service sector is not a labor intensive sector, right? So we have to understand that service sector is not a labor intensive sector. However, the manufacturing or industry, so this is a labor intensive, highly labor intensive sector. But agriculture is also a labor intensive sector, and in fact in India around 48 to 52 percentage of the workforce still engages in agriculture sector, but it generates only around 18 percentage of India's total GDP, right? So in fact India's growth trajectory has also skipped the manufacturing sector or the industry. It directly jumped from the agriculture sector to the service sector. So therefore, there is a need to focus on the manufacturing sector because manufacturing sector is a labor intensive sector and it has the potential to create a large scale employment opportunities for India's educated youth, right? So that is the objective, and that is why the government has launched the employment linked incentive scheme that provides incentives for the employers and employees as well. And this employment linked incentive scheme is part of Prime Minister's broader five scheme employment package, and that includes internships with major companies and youth skill development initiatives, right? So I hope it is clear for you. Now we'll understand what are the key provisions of this employment linked incentive scheme, because it has certain key incentives for both employees and employers as well. Now, firstly, if you look at the implementation duration of this employment linked incentive scheme, so it starts from 1st August 2025 till July 31st, 2027, right? So it would be implemented for around 2 years. Now, the implementing agency would be Employees Provident Fund Organization. And what is the goal and objective of employment linked incentive scheme? So it aimed at creating around 3.5 crore jobs in just 2 years. So 3.5 crore jobs will be created in next 2 years, and that is the objective of the employment linked incentive scheme. Now, who are the expected beneficiaries of this employment linked incentive scheme? So the expected beneficiaries including 1.92 crore newly employed individuals. Now, employee benefits eligibility including salaries of up to 1 lakh a month. Now, incentives including 1 month EPF wage up to 15,000 rupees will be given to the employees, right? So those individuals whose salaries are up to 1 lakh a month, so they will get benefited from this employment linked incentive scheme, and the expected beneficiaries would be 1.92 lakh, so 92 crore employees, right? So the dispersal, so it will be dispersed in two installments. The first installment after 6 months of service, and second installment after 12 months of service. And what is the mode of dispersal? So it is just a direct bank transfer. And in fact, it also has the savings component as well, because a part of the benefit will go into the fixed deposits account withdrawable. This amount can be withdrawn in later time. Now, what are the employer incentives for this particular scheme? So if we talk about the employer incentives, so the eligibility, so those establishments, those companies which are established under the Employees Provident Fund organization. Now, in fact, if we talk about the support, so it provides a support of up to 3,000 rupees per month for each new employee retained for at least 6 months for 2 years. And in fact, for manufacturing firms, the incentives extended to the third and fourth years as well, right? So these are the benefits which are being provided to the employers. Now, what was the response of the employers to this employment linked incentive scheme? And in fact, as a lot of private companies and even employers, so they actually call this employment linked incentive scheme as a laudable initiative, right? So they welcome this employment linked incentive scheme because that encourages the first time employment, and it also create a sustained job or sustained employment opportunities, specifically in the manufacturing sector, right? And secondly, so they have also highlighted the scheme's potential to boost the labor intensive sector. In the beginning, I have already told you that the manufacturing sector is called as the labor intensive sector. So therefore, this employment linked incentive scheme is actually having that potential to generate a huge employment opportunities, right, in the manufacturing sector, because manufacturing is a labor intensive sector. And in fact, it can even transform India's employment ecosystem as well. However, the industry experts, they have stressed the need to include micro and small manufacturing units, especially those with fewer than 20 employees under the scheme's benefits. However, they even proposed that shifting the scheme to the MSME and using a structured reimbursement model based on a payroll growth as well. So these are some suggestions that these employers have actually made. However, experts have suggested a direct monthly subsidy to both employer and employee, and they tied to continue employment for in future uh, simpler and wider adoption as well, right? So these are some suggestions that the employers have made to make the employment linked incentive scheme more and more lucrative, right, more and more attractive, so that it can actually encourage creation of gainful employment opportunities for India's youth to achieve its actual potential, right? So I hope you have understood this particular component. And next important topic is lessons from Telangana blast, and this is an article that has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and this is important for your general studies paper 3 economy. And in that particular paper there is a topic called disaster management as well. So from that particular point of view, this topic is very important. Now we'll understand the context very briefly, and then we'll go into the details of this topic. Now recently what happened was a powerful explosion at a Sigachi Industries. And this Sigachi Industries is a pharmaceutical factory which is located near Hyderabad. And this powerful explosion that took place in Sigachi Industries has flattened a three-story building, firstly. Secondly, of the 143 workers who were present at that particular company during the explosion, at the time of explosion, so 39 individuals have lost their lives. And in fact, the Sigachi Industries also denied the initial claims of a reactor explosion. And in fact, the industry has even asserted that the blast did not originate from the reactor failure. But this is a very big deal that out of 143 workers, 39 workers have lost their lives in this Sigachi Industries. And after this explosion, a four-member expert committee, which is led by CSIR IICT Emeritus Scientist B. Venkateshwar Rao, and this particular committee is probing the cause of explosion from the Sigachi Industries. I hope you have understood this particular top context. Right now, what is the likely cause of Sigachi Industries blast that took place in Telangana? So, the total number of deaths have increased to 42. And in fact, initially, the blast was thought to be because of boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. Right. So, initial conclusion was the blast was because of a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. But this theory was dismissed by the company and even the forensic experts as well. However, the experts have now suspecting that there might be a dust explosion. And this dust explosion, it might be triggered by a airborne microcrystalline cellulose, right? So this airborne microcrystalline cellulose is actually a fine wood pulp powder, and that is used in pharmaceutical manufacturing, right? So I hope you have it is clear for you. And these dust explosions have a well documented in industries like flour milling, mining, grain storage, and which could be dating back to 1785 also. So that took place at a place called Turin in Italy. However, the factory which has processed the wood slurry into the microcrystalline cellulose using spray dryers. And in fact, the problem with this particular powder is it is highly combustible when suspended in air, thereby making it prone to ignition. So therefore, this airborne microcrystalline cellulose might be responsible for a powerful explosion that took place in Sirachi Industries in Telangana. Now, in fact, there are regulatory lapses in the Telangana factory blast as well. So, we'll be understanding what are the regulatory lapses which are actually flagged after this incident. Now, in fact, the emergency responders who have to respond immediately after this such a blast, so they arrived at the site without actually knowing the materials which are actually involved in the blast. And in fact, as a mandatory display, boards were incomplete or even missing as well. And in fact, both central as well as the state pollution control boards would actually require factories to display environmental as well as the operational details. to guide fire as well as disaster teams after such incidents have taken place, so that they can have a measured response to such incidents, right? So they can quickly take the situation under control, and they can also minimize the loss of lives as well, if the central and state pollution control boards have ensured that such industries have displayed the environmental and operational details of those industries. However, here in this case, Sigachi Industries failed to comply with the norms. And apart from that, there is a lack of environmental data. So this environmental data has also been delayed, and it has complicated the rescue and firefighting efforts, putting lives at a greater risk. And apart from that, a robust regulatory framework with periodic audits would have further ensured compliance and even faster emergency response as well, right? So these regulatory lapses have been flagged in Telangana factory blast, and they have to be complied by every industry so that the losses can be minimized. And it also provides adequate leverage for the for the firefighters and the disaster teams to rescue the individuals and come up with adequate response as well. The next important topic, and this could be important for both prelims and mains exam perspective, this is about the Nipah outbreak that took place in the state of Kerala. And in this context, Kerala has decided to launch a serological survey amid the Nipah outbreak that took place in the state of Kerala. And so here are some details have been given about the Nipah virus. Now, Nipah virus is called as a zoonotic disease. Now, COVID-19 is also a zoonotic disease. Now, what exactly is a zoonotic disease? The zoonotic disease is a disease that can spread from the animals to human beings, right? So it is very simple that any disease which spreads from animals to human beings, which is called as a zoonotic disease, right? So they can jump from animal to human and human to human as well, right? So now in this case, Nipah virus, the host or the reservoir is infected fruit bats, and this disease spreads from the infected fruit bats to human beings, right? So you can go through the symptoms as well. So any person who is infected with this, so they would feel fever, headache, vomiting, muscle pain, so all these things. What are the causes? So if you look at the causes, a close contact with the infected animals or its bodily fluids, contaminated food, so these factors are responsible for the spread of zoonotic disease, and in this case Nipah virus. So how can it be recognized? An RT-PCR test can be conducted, right? So a throat or nasal swabs, and the spinal fluids, blood, urine, and at a later stages, ELISA can also be done to for the purpose of diagnosis, right? So treatment including supportive care can be provided, because no vaccine or no specific medicine is available for the treatment of the Nipah virus. So Nipah virus is an emerging zoonotic virus, and that can be transmitted to humans from animals, both wild animals as well as the domestic animals. And so as I have already explained what exactly a zoonotic disease. So it can also be transmitted through the contaminated food or directly from person to person as well. The fruit bats of the Pteropodiae family are the natural host of this Nipah virus. And in fact, this Nipah virus infection can sometimes be asymptomatic or mild as well, right? So, but it also causes acute respiratory illness and even fatal encephalitis among the infected human beings. However, if you look at the fatality rate, so this is estimated between 40 to 75% or even higher as well. And it varies depending on the specific Nipah virus strain and access to and quality of healthcare or the severity of illness as well. Now, if you look at the treatment carefully, so it includes there are no specific treatment available for this, but vaccines are available for the Nipah virus infection either for the people or for the animals as well. So these are some details with respect to the Nipah virus. And that's all in this lecture. And thank you so much. And if you like our discussion, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.